Hello, my name is Laura Vargas. I'm the Director of Outreach Programs for SADOD, which stands for Support After a Death by Overdose. SADOD was founded by peer support community partners in 2019. SADOD is funded by the Bureau of Substance Addiction Services in Massachusetts. We focus on providing peer-based grief support for deaths due to substance use-related causes. It's not limited to deaths due to overdose, any death that has some sort of relation to substance use. Today, we'll be talking about grief and how to work with individuals who are grieving. This will only be a very brief introduction. We offer a number of trainings, resources, and additional information. So if you'd like to learn more, please visit our website, www.sadod.org, or contact me, laura@sadod.org. We'll start off by defining grief. Grief is the normal, natural reaction to loss, and this can be any kind of loss. But today we'll be focusing on grief following a death. We hear from many people in the behavioral health field who feel that they do not understand how best to support an individual who's grieving. Individuals who are grieving describe the pain of grief as the primary feature. This pain can be caused by many kinds of serious losses, such as job loss, divorce, any type of loss. But in this case, we'll be focusing on grief following a death. We'll start off by discussing why somebody who's grieving might reach out for support. Grief affects people emotionally, physically, spiritually, and relationally. It can be really overwhelming to manage all of this emotionally. This might come up as anger, anxiety, helplessness, hopelessness, sadness, shock, disbelief, blame, guilt, fear, or confusion, and a number of other emotions. In addition, a person's emotions may change from one minute to the next, or they may come in waves where people feel different emotions all at the same time. Physically, this can come up with individuals having trouble sleeping, having shortness of breath, getting headaches, nausea, changes in appetite, stomach pain, feeling a knot in their throat, fatigue, dry mouth, heaviness of muscles, and several other physical effects. Spiritually, people may question their lifelong beliefs, which can be really difficult, and that in and of itself can be a loss. People may turn away from their spirituality, or on the contrary, they may actually lean more into their spirituality or to their faith than ever before. People may feel abandoned by their beliefs, or people might feel very supported by their spirituality and find that it is their grief refuge. It is so different for each individual. Likewise, relationally, people may be more irritable. They may isolate themselves, or they may do the opposite and need to be around others more than usual. In order to support a grieving person, you don't need to be an expert in grief. You do not need to fully understand how the grief experience plays out for each individual. We want to start with the foundation, person-centered and trauma-informed care. Person-centered care primarily means seeing each individual person for who they are and respecting the unique grief journey that they are on. This means focusing on the needs of the individual, supporting them to recognize and develop their own strengths, abilities, and autonomy, and treating them with dignity, understanding, and respect. It is not imposing our beliefs about how they should cope with their grief. The intensity and entire experience of grief is unique for each individual. SADOD's approach to person-centered peer grief support is based on the work of Carl Rogers, a pioneer in the development of person-centered care. You have a handout titled Person-Centered Care 12 Actions that shows the actions we have identified related to peer grief support based on Rogers' idea that person-centered care requires the helper to meet three conditions: genuineness, realness, congruence, accepting, caring, prizing, and empathic understanding. First condition required for person-centered care is genuineness, realness, and congruence. This means be yourself. Do not put up a facade or act in a role. Accept your own feelings and attitudes. Communicate accurately as your real self. Roger's second condition for person-centered care is accepting, caring, and prizing. This means meet the griever where they are at. Do not judge what the griever shares as good or bad. Give the griever the benefit of the doubt. Value the griever as a human being who deserves understanding, benevolence, and respect. The third condition for person-centered care is empathic understanding. This means listen to learn what the person means and how the person feels. Pay attention only to the griever as they talk. Affirm what the griever says. Keep the griever's story as the center of the conversation. We practice trauma-informed care. What does that mean? We start off with 4 R's from SAMHSA. Realize, recognize, respond, and resist. We'll go into each one in greater detail. Realize. This means realizing the widespread impact of trauma and understanding potential paths for recovery, that there are more than one path towards trauma recovery. This means recognizing signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, families, staff, and others involved with the system. Responding by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices. And finally, resisting re-traumatization proactively. Active measures must be taken to not re-traumatize somebody who has already been through enough trauma. Here are some guidelines for trauma-informed care. You'll also have this as a handout. Number 1, know that any person might be affected by trauma, but that not all people have been affected by trauma. Number 2, don't label people. Know that people's behavior comes from their attempts to cope with their trauma. Number 4, create and sustain a safe space for the person. Number 5, give the person choices. Number 6, follow the person's lead. Number 7, notice and focus on the person's strengths. Number 8, prevent re-traumatization. Number 9, help people step back from stress and come down from intense feelings. And number 10, recognize the role of the person's family, community, society, and culture. It is common for grieving people to feel very strong emotions and intense pain over their loss. When talking with a helper, the griever may sob or cry uncontrollably, or have trouble catching their breath, express anger sharply, stridently blame someone or something for the death, be upset over abandonment or rejection by the deceased, insist about unfairness or mistreatment of them or of the deceased, be distressed over feelings of guilt, shame, or failure, seem dazed, confused, or in a state of disbelief, repeatedly say they feel helpless or hopeless, say they've been abandoned or rejected, express fear that they are not okay or that someone else will die. Following may be helpful to you. Notice if you are feeling inwardly distressed and take steps to calm yourself, such as conscious breathing, intentionally relaxing your body, concentrating on the griever's needs. Affirm to yourself that grief and this person's reactions to it are natural and normal. Tell them that you can see how much pain they are in. Make supportive statements such as, I'm here to listen to you, and I will help you if I can. Tell or indicate to the person that their feelings are understandable because someone they love died. Say or indicate to the person that it is okay to feel as sad, angry, abandoned, mistreated, in shock, afraid, etc. as they feel. Give the person time and tell the person to take their time. Follow their lead regarding how much you ask about what happened or about their person. Active listening helps you listen deeply and compassionately to a grieving person without trying to solve or fix their grief. This involves listening wholeheartedly, which is the best way to truly hear a grieving person who is sharing their story. We listen with all of our heart. Active listening techniques include affirming, reflecting, summarizing, and acknowledging. All of these will help you concentrate on what the person is saying and at the same time let the person know that you are listening carefully. We'll go into greater detail around these active listening techniques. Starting off with affirming. An affirming statement shows the speaker that he or she has been heard and that what they have to say is understood, appreciated, respected, and accepted as valid. Responsive affirmations confirm something the person said without adding anything to it. Some examples include, "Thank you for telling us who your son was. Your questions are important. I respect what you're saying." Proactive affirmations are encouraging, but they're not platitudes or glib statements, such as, "I'm interested in what you have to say. I am hopeful that you will find your way through this. I don't know what the answer is, but I believe you will find an answer." Another technique of active listening is reflecting. Practice reflective listening by paraphrasing what the person said and asking for confirmation or clarification. For example, in other words, you're saying, and you would paraphrase what you think the person said. "Did I hear you correctly?" And then paraphrase what you heard. "Is this what you mean?" Again, paraphrasing your interpretation of what they said. Third technique is summarizing. In the middle of a conversation, summarizing the other person's main points shows that you're paying attention and following the thread of their story. For example, "You said that whenever you try to talk about your son, your husband changes the subject. You also said that trying to talk to him about it goes nowhere and that this hurts your feelings badly every time it happens." You could then follow up with an open-ended question such as, "Why do you think this keeps happening?" Finally, acknowledging. Acknowledging the person's feelings can be a helpful invitation for them to say more. Be careful to address emotions that the person has mentioned or demonstrated. For example, "You look very sad when you say that. You sound very upset when you talk about that. I can see that this is causing you a lot of pain. I see you are trying to cope with it." And it's actually an affirmation to say, "I see you're having trouble coping with this," as long as it reflects what the person is expressing and is not passing a judgment. Asking open-ended questions. Open-ended questions show that you're interested in hearing what the person wants to talk about. Asking an open-ended question invites the person to respond thoughtfully and to tell more of their story. If you intentionally focus on being curious about what the person is saying, open-ended questions will come to mind. For example, rather than focusing on what our response is going to be to what they're saying, getting curious about it and asking questions, questions that will allow us to gather information, ask for clarification, ask about their personal story, asking for analysis. This can be really empowering to individuals who are grieving to be given the opportunity to share their story or to share their experiences in the way that they would like to do so. Open-ended questions allow us to gather more information. Statements or questions such as, "Tell me more about that. How did you feel about that? Is there anything else you remember about that?" Again, this puts it back on the individual to share as much or as little as they would like. Ask for clarification using open-ended questions. You can ask questions such as, "How does this relate to what we have been talking about? Can you give me an example? Can you explain or say that in another way? What do you mean?" About their personal story, we can ask questions such as, "How did that affect you? How did that help you? How did that make a difference or change things? What happened next? Or what else happened? How did you handle that? What else is important for us to understand about what happened?" Will you please tell us or say more about that? All of these invite the person to share more about their personal story. To ask questions for analysis, we can ask questions such as, what do you think caused that? Why or how do you think that happened? Why is that important? What does that mean to you? How do you plan to respond to that? Why did you do that? For this one, it's very important to make certain that your tone is neutral and not judgmental. These questions allow us to get a sense of where the person stands and how they're viewing things, which can allow us to help them better or to at least foster a better relationship with them. One of the biggest questions that we get from people who are ready to provide support to somebody who's grieving might have some apprehension is, what do we do if somebody expresses a desire to die or to hurt themselves? And what we would say is that it's important to recognize that it's common for a person who has just experienced the sudden death of a loved one to talk about wanting to die. They might say things such as, I just want to be with my loved one. I have no reason to live. I can't survive feeling this pain one more day. I wish I could go to sleep and never wake up. Follow your agency's protocols if someone is directly threatening to kill themselves or harm someone else. Keep in mind, though, that the hallmark of grief is immense, unrelenting sadness, and a person may need a safe space where they can express thoughts such as the ones mentioned above without being interrupted or pressured to feel better. If it's indicated, follow the practice of asking directly about suicidal intent. Do not use euphemisms or oblique questions. This is a common misconception that by asking directly about suicide or self-harm will put the idea in somebody's head. But it's actually quite the opposite. It is so important to ask direct questions such as, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you planning to do something to end your life? Is there a chance you're going to kill yourself? It's important to note that if a person exhibits imminent warning signs, such as talking or writing about death, dying, or suicide, threatening to hurt or kill themselves, or looking for ways to kill themselves, it's crucial to take decisive action to keep them safe from harm, which can include contacting emergency medical services or a crisis team. You can call 911 or call 988. 988 is the new suicide and crisis line. This number can be called, texted, or the website can be visited. They also include several helpful resources for those looking to learn more about suicide prevention. Likewise, there's the Be the One To campaign, which also has very helpful resources on suicide prevention. Finally, we like to acknowledge that chronically unrelenting grief is referred to as prolonged grief or complicated grief. But there's debate even among professionals about applying any mental health diagnosis to grief, something that's so natural. At SADOD, we refer to grief that exceeds the normal range of experience as debilitating grief. This is an apt phrase because the main identifying feature of problematic grief is that the grieving person is unable to function in the basic activities of life. They are incapacitated when it comes to coping with strong emotions, meeting routine responsibilities, or performing essential self-care. Within a few weeks or months of a sudden death, a grieving person may be debilitated in this way and yet not have anything wrong with them, except that they are experiencing their grief very intensely. This can be the case still for some grievers a year or more after a death. But even though there's no hard and fast rule for how long after a death grief can be judged as truly problematic, consider referral to a higher level of care if someone is plagued by the inability to function beyond what might be expected in their context or culture. We'll actually have a separate training on the importance of cultural humility and grief support because they are so intertwined. Grief, in and of itself, is the normal, natural reaction to loss, and it's hard to say when a line is crossed. For people, their grief experience can vary every single day. Every day can be something different. Grief, as we mentioned, is also very strongly tied to culture. Again, this was a very broad overview of the grief experience. If there are any questions or need for additional training, support, or resources, please do not hesitate to reach out. The website is www.sadod.org. Thank you so much.